Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is where you are. Welcome to our Embracing Continuous Improvement in Responsible Peatland Management webinar. My name is Kevin Warner. I am emceeing today. I am also the Director of ESG Certifications and Strategy at SCS Global Services. In that role, I oversee all of our sustainable ag programs, our sustainable food programs, and that includes external standards like Rainforest Alliance, Fair Trade, and a whole bunch of others in that realm. We also have in-house programs, of which there are 3, Sustainably Grown, Veriflora, and the Responsibly Managed Peatlands program. Just to do a little bit of housekeeping before we get going, all attendees are in listen-only mode. So this is a webinar. As much as you talk at us, we can't hear you. So it's only going in one direction. So keep that in mind. We will have a Q&A session at the end. So we've reserved time for that. If you have questions during the webinar, please put it into the chat and I will try and use those and pull that into the conversation. I am both emceeing and running the technical side, and I'm not great at multitasking, so we'll see how well that goes. I might be a bottleneck there, but we will address questions and pull them at the end. The webinar is recorded, or is being recorded. We will send out a link for that to all attendees within a day or so, as soon as that gets processed. And just in terms of the format for today, we are going to do some introduction with our panelists so you get to know them. I will give a brief background on the Responsibly Managed Peatlands program. Each of our guests will do a short presentation on one aspect of the certification and how it's part of their operations, how it impacts their operations, how they handle it. We'll do a roundtable discussion after that, where I've got some questions prepared, and we'll sort of have a fireside chat, if you will, and have more of a conversation there, and then we'll get to Q&A at the end with attendees. So I guess to start, let's introduce our panelists. So Pierre-Olivier Sauvageau, do you want to jump in, tell us who you are, where you work, what you do?
Sure thing, Kevin. Thank you. So my name is Pierre-Olivier Sauvageau. I've been working with Berger Peatmoss as a natural resource advisor for the last 6 or 7 years now. I have a degree in biology and a master in environmental science. And as for Berger Peatmoss, the company, we are talking about 50 plus year family-owned business that is operating in pretty much all provinces in Canada and a few states in the United States. And we are currently at our 3rd generation owners. So that's for the short introduction.
Excellent. Tanya Garcia Bravo, do you want to welcome? Tell us who you are.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the presentation today. And thank you for being here with us in this webinar. I'm Tania Garcia Bravo. I'm the technical resources here at Sangro Horticulture. I'm restoration ecologist, and I have spent more than a decade in land restoration focused on peatlands and carbon emissions. I'm originally from Spain, where we have beautiful ecosystem, but not too many peatlands. And my curiosity about peatlands restoration and carbon stock opened the opportunity and the honor to study with Dr. Lynn Rochefort and Dr. Maria Strack at the Peatland Ecological Research Group. And please make yourself comfortable to enjoy this session, and feel free to ask any question if you have.
Excellent. Thank you, Tanya. Our second Pierre-Olivier Jean, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, my name is Pierre-Olivier Jean. I work with Permatech Growers and Consumer. I've been working in natural resource with Premier for the past 7 years now. Our team is responsible for environmental compliance of our sites, as well as the planning of restoration activities and maintaining the Veriflora certification across our sites. My background is in terrestrial ecology. I completed my PhD in 2015. And actually, I grew up next to a peat harvest site in the Rivière-du-Loup area. So I've been knowing about these operations for a long time now. And I'm very pleased to talk to you today and explain to you what the certification does to our operation and how positive what all the positive it can bring to that industry. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you to all three of you for joining us today. I think it's going to be a good conversation. So I'll do a short intro on the Responsibly Managed Peatlands program. It's been around for more than a decade at this point. Was originally an annex to the Veriflora program. We have, as I mentioned before, we have 3 in-house sustainability certifications for agriculture at SCS. Sustainably Grown is focused on food products and is adopted by a lot of farm brands. The Veriflora program is sort of the sister program that's focused on horticulture, cut flowers, nurseries, greenhouse operations, non-food agriculture essentially. And then the Responsibly Managed Peatlands program, which in 2018, after being an annex of the Veriflora program for many years, it had legs, and we separated it out into its own standard. We have clients currently in Scotland and Argentina and the United States and Canada. And Canada's where the bulk of it is, though. And actually, this is a good opportunity. Let's do our poll here. So let's see if that launches. So just to make sure everyone's paying attention. What percentage of total Canadian peat production is certified under the Responsibly Managed Peatlands program? I'll give you a few more seconds to answer there. While you're doing that, I'll talk about why we do our program. So it is an annual audit, and more than just an audit, it is a roadmap for continuous improvement. It's a standardization of best practices in peatlands management, and it covers sort of holistically a huge range of topics across the sustainability spectrum. This includes environmental issues, social issues, around protection of workers, as well as the governance, management systems, quality systems that are intrinsic to good operations. All right, let me close this poll. Let's see where we are. I'm not seeing a pop-up, but maybe you all are. Are you seeing it? No. Well, 46% said 80%, and that 46% is correct. We do certify the vast majority of peat output from Canada, which is significant. The framework, that the continuous improvement pathway is also important for assurance. And I think that's an important element here, and where the third-party element is so critical. It's not just peat producers saying they're doing things the responsible way, that they're sustainable. It's the value and the assurance that comes with a third-party audit is very important for governments. It's important for retailers and buyers, and it's important for consumers as well. That's sort of the basic background of the program. It's always evolving. It's always changing. We keep updating it. It's a living thing, and it will evolve as production evolves, as the market evolves. Just this year, we are updating the greenhouse gas calculator to adapt to new science, better science, and we will go through a revision process of the overall standard around every 5 years or so. So let's jump into our presentations. Pierre-Olivier Sauvageau, you were first. Let me pull up my screen. 1 second. So the screen is shared. I'm going to give you control of the mouse. Is that going?
Yes, there we go.
Excellent.
Thanks, Kevin. So I will kickstart the presentation with basically trying to explain you what is the audit process attached to the Veriflora certification. So any certification comes with a set of obligations that you need to conform. And the third party, which is SCS Global in that case, needs to have some kind of mechanism to ensure that the company which is certified do comply with the obligation. And that's where the audit process comes in. So throughout my presentation, very short one, I'm just gonna explain that mechanism. So how does it work actually on the site? And after that, kind of give you what kind of feedback a company like Berger can have from these audits and what kind of changes and modification to our operation we can do to better comply and overall better manage our peatland. And at the end of it all, I will go through the benefits of having such an audit process and overall such a certification for both the industry, the peat industry, but also for basically anyone that is concerned with peatland management. So the audit itself, each year an audit is carried on Berger certified sites. The first thing I will say is that it will not be feasible in terms of times and resource to do all Berger sites each year, and there's no real plus value to that. What we rather do is cycle through. For example, 1 year we will choose a specific set of harvesting sites, and the next year it will be a different one. And through a cycle of about 3 years or so, we'll be able to do all Berger sites and make sure that they all comply with the obligation. So as Kevin said, the Veriflora certification comes a very wide range, very varied type of obligation. And the auditor, which will come directly on site, there was some issue with COVID and all that, but normally the auditor will be on site and will have a checklist of any and all of those obligations will be checked and see, do you comply or not? And just to give you a short idea of how much varied they are, Kevin named a few, but we're talking about on the environmental side, water quality management, reclamation operation, and Pierre-Olivier Jean from Premier will go more in depth in terms of what kind of restoration we do, but this is a big part of the certification. We're also talking about everything pertaining to carbon, and my co-panelist Tanya will go again more in depth in terms of the inventory of greenhouse gases, for example, that we need to do to comply with the certification. We're talking also waste management, all things related to fair labor practices, so workforce security, workforce equity, and last but not least, we're also talking about everything that is engagement. So how does the company is having benefits in the community and consulting with people about its operation. So as you can see, it's a very type of obligation, and each audit will make sure to check them all, making sure that we do comply with all those obligations. One thing that will be done directly on site will be interviews with random Berger employees. There's a lot of those obligations that needs to be checked with an expert at the company, because I mean, it's not the responsibility of the guys on the field. But even then, the auditor from SCS Global will go out and interview random people in a confidential manner and just ask questions about everything pertaining to labor, workforce, and their general knowledge of the Veriflora certification and their environmental obligations. So that gives Veriflora kind of a feel of what is happening actually on site, which is extremely good for the audit as a whole. Once the audit is finished, okay, so once the audit is finished, Berger will receive a full report, and that report will include any non-conformities and improvement area where Berger needs to do a bit of work on those areas. There's really two sides of the let's say the area where we need to work on. Non-conformities for Veriflora is a red flag, meaning that you're not complying with what you need to do in your obligation. On the other side, you have also improvement area where you actually comply with what you need to do, but you could do it a bit better in some ways. So based on those reports, Berger will need to put in place a response plan. So making sure that we answer those either non-conformities or improvement areas, and this response plan will not be something that will be just postponed to next audit next year. So there's a lot of back and forth between Berger and SCS throughout the year, making sure that those plans are actually in place, enforced, so that during the next year audits, those non-conformities will actually be resolved. What are the benefits of all that? So this is a lot of time and resource, but do we get something out of it? Before I get into really what's the benefit for Berger as a company, there's also benefits for everyone concerned by peatland management. So as Kevin said, because of the wide scope of all those obligations and the fact that most of the peat harvesting sites are actually under the certification, it ensures that all those obligations and that wide range of obligations are actually followed and complied with. So in turn, that makes sure that our peatlands in North America are actually responsibly managed. For the company itself, having to go through that audit each year, it means that we also need on our side to do internal audits. So internal audits allows us to kind of pre-check our obligation and make sure that we are complying with it. It also comes with kind of a general standardization of our management practice. And, you know, a lot of harvesting sites are quite different depending on where you are and how much, what kind of operation you have and the scale of the operation. But having that list of Veriflora obligation allows us to make sure that all those sites, how much different they are, doesn't matter. We'll make sure that they do comply with those obligations. And bottom line, it just allows Berger's workforce to be more knowledgeable of our environmental obligation, social obligation, and what makes Berger a good, responsible corporate citizen in terms of managing their peatlands. So as a final word, I would just like to thank everybody that come to the webinar. I'm saying that my camera is frozen right now in a kind of weird shape. That's how it is. But thank you, and we will gladly ask your questions during the Q&A. And I will give the floor to Tanya to talk about a bit more about the greenhouse gases inventory and calculator. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Tanya, I'm giving you control now, so I think you should be able to go. Yeah. Can you
Anya,
hear?
are you
I'm
on
not
mute?
hearing.
There you go. Better now?
Yeah. Yep.
There you go. That's great. I was saying thank you very much for your presentation, Pierre-Olivier. You did a really good job. And I want to thank CSC Global for inviting Sangro to this webinar. I'm pleased to share our experience with us. And I would like to begin by acknowledge that we are on traditional land, referred to Treaty 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, and 8 territory in the province of Alberta and Manitoba, and the territory covered by the Treaty of Peace and Friendship. We're all treaty people, and all the people here are beneficiary of this peace and friendly treaty. So the greenhouse gases management aims to reduce the carbon footprint of the peat moss production in increasing the restoration practices to optimize the carbon capture. Today, I want to highlight the importance of greenhouse gases calculator in our Sangro operations. So every year, since 2011, Sangro volunteered to audit our practices by Veriflora certification. Pierre-Olivier did a really good job explaining all that the audit process involves. Veriflora is a holistic certification that provides transparency, credibility, and improve our highest standards of our best practice based on, as we mentioned, values and commitment, resources conservation, energy efficiency, waste management, fair labor practices, community benefits, and last but not least, product quality. And why we care about this is because in 2018, CSC Global implemented the tool for carbon emission estimations. Since then, several versions has been updated, and Kevin mentioned already that even a few weeks ago, the last version was implemented as they take the feedback from practitioners and research to continue optimizing these tools that support the needs of the industry. I want to have this opportunity to thank you and appreciate the effort that you do for continue the efforts improving your tools and guidelines. And why this is important is because we share a common purpose, that is acknowledge that reducing the greenhouse gases emission can be solved. And with this current tool, the greenhouse gases calculator, we can quantify targets and identify gaps to reach our goal, that is reducing the carbon footprint, focus on priorities and implementation. Sorry about the delay. So to reduce the carbon footprint and increase restoration practices, the greenhouse gases calculator focus on three main scopes to quantify emissions coming from mechanical and non-mechanical sources at the plant, in the office, and in all our sites, including land management, energy consumption, manufacturing, transportation, and distribution. So this, there we go. This, sorry. Can we go back?
I think that you can click to the small arrow at the bottom left. Yep. There we go.
There we go. Thank you. Okay, we're back. So this greenhouse gases calculator is important not only to meeting the veriflora certification requires, but because it provides us the perfect tool to quantify the current carbon footprint, identify hot spots in terms of emissions, and prioritizing efforts by identifying reduction possibilities, setting reduction goals and corrective action plans that Pierre-Olivier has mentioned before, and over time measuring and reporting the greenhouse gases. Okay, so peatlands are important carbon reservoirs, and therefore they contribute to the greenhouse gases reductions in the atmosphere. In the last 25 years, SANGRO has been actively committed to supporting knowledge on responsible peatland management and addressing questions to restore peatlands after harvesting end. So the greenhouse gases calculator tool now allows us to quantify the carbon sequestration on restored peatlands depending on the restoration techniques and the years post-restoration. In this graphic, you can see the trajectory of the carbon sequestration using Moss layer transfer technique from in ecological restoration from year 1 to more than 30 years. And you can notice that inflection point here between 10 to 15 years, where the restore site passed from releasing carbon to fixing or capturing carbon in the soil. So this graphic is a scientific confirmation of restoration practices and methodology in post-harvesting peatlands, and we continue to support new research questions and develop monitoring programs because active restoration enhances the ability of the ecosystem to recover its hydrology, biodiversity, and carbon dynamics. So we know now that restoring can rebuild the carbon function of disturbed peatlands within 10 to 15 years after restoration. Now, the greenhouse gases calculator allows us to quantify our best practices in terms of carbon footprint and identify possibilities and develop priority targets for carbon footprint reduction. Continue with restoration practices is part of our sustainable land management strategy that includes restoration, water quality, and monitoring, which are crucial to minimize the greenhouse gases emissions and restoring carbon sinks. Now, the greenhouse gases calculator has developed other priorities to implement energy efficiency programs and assess manufacturing operations and waste management for for example, we can mention that now we can evaluate that 30% of the greenhouse gases emissions coming from manufacture is by the use of plastics. So many options are available to reduce the carbon footprint, and SANGRO focus on mitigation options for buildings and energy consumption by applying technology innovations, waste management, and behavioral change. So our goal is to reduce the carbon footprint, and veriflora certification is a benefit to enhance our sustainability strategy. The greenhouse gases calculator has set a baseline to target actions, anticipate challenge, and implement monitoring measurements. So these implementations are possible with cohesive network, effort, and commitment. And with that, I want to thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. And I pass to Pierre-Olivier Jean to continue this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Let me switch control over here.
Yeah, it looks good. Thank you very much,
Good.
Tanya, and the other PO. You did a great job, and I'll also make bridges for with what you presented already. I'm glad to be here today to present you this aspect of the certification, peatland restoration. This is a central piece of the certification, and today I decided to hone in on the method, like to explain the technicalities behind peatland restoration, and I'll also explain what the certification does to make sure it is enforced, and also how the certification provides a culture of peatland restoration within our industry. There's a small delay. Okay, so
Well, it's going through my from my computer in St. Louis to the internet to you and back again, so there's a bit of a lag there. Sorry about that.
There's a lag between Quebec and California. I get that. So I'm presenting you today the moss layer transfer technique, which is the best practice for restoring peat harvest sites. It's been developed in the early 90s and was constantly improved since then. It's a method that was developed with the Peatland Ecology Research Group, a research group based in Laval University in Quebec, but also present in various universities across Canada. And well, what I'm showing you on this slide is basically the outcome that we wish to obtain when we restore a peatland. Now, the first picture that you see on your left is a site that was restored 22 years ago. And you can see on the other picture that there's about 20 centimeters, that would be 6 inches, right? I think, of accumulation on a 22-year-old restored area. So the purpose of, the function of accumulating carbon is back on this site, and I'll follow up on that. So when you initiate the action of doing peatland restoration, you must select a donor site, which is basically the technique aims at reintroducing plant fragments from a reference ecosystem to the disturbed peat harvest site. So we select a site that has the species that we want to reintroduce, and we shred about 5 centimeters, 5 to 10 centimeters. That would be 2 to 3 inches. The very surface of the donor site, which basically represent the living plants that we want to reintroduce. We use an equipment like this rotivator on the surface, and we load the plant fragments with an excavator for transport to the restored site. An important point here to note is that the donor site, a donor site of 1 acre will provide sufficient plants to restore an area of 10 acres approximately. And generally within 5 to 10 years, the site has completely regenerated to the reference ecosystem. This is a picture, and this is not a fake. We can see the same power line in the background. This is the exact same spot. The picture was first taken in 2013 while we were doing the restoration. And 2019, the site was, there was no difference between the reference and the collection site. So this is good to note. But this is the first step. I'll change slide now. In the meantime, at the location where we want to do the restoration, the operators will profile the fields to make sure there's two main objectives with that, is to redistribute water evenly on the surface, and also to have a fresh interface between bare peat and introduced plant fragments. So it will help for the plants to recolonize once we refreshed the site. We use an equipment called a profiler to do this task. So once we've prepared the site and that the donor material is ready, we use a manure spreader. Sometimes we modify them to make sure they don't damage the peat surface because they're heavy equipment. And I hope the video will work. Well, you can imagine. So the goal here is to spread a thin layer of plant fragments on the peat surface. We do that evenly on the site that we aim to restore. Okay, changing slide now. Should I stop the video? I think. There you go. Once we spread a thin layer of plant fragments, we need to protect that from desiccation. So we use straw mulch. It's a very important step. The straw mulch is a material that we choose because it's fairly cheap and usually widely available in the areas where we operate. And also it will decompose, the straw mulch will decompose within the first 5 years after restoration, but it will provide the protection from desiccation to the fragile plant fragments over the first few years after restoration. Once we've done that, we must make sure that the main ditches are being blocked for efficient re-wetting. So these wetlands that we're restoring, they're not supposed to we want to keep that water in, right? So to make sure the bryophytes and plants that are usually thriving in these environments, they stay wet and they can grow. So blocking the ditches is the last step here. Changing slide. Okay, now, does it work? That's the most important question, I think. So this method is over 20 years old now, and we had the opportunity to we have the opportunity to have many scientific publication on that method. So we have data to back that rationale that this method works really well in restoring the plant communities. And I wanted to emphasize on here on the first few years after restoration, because usually we present the outcome, you know, after 20 years, after 15 years. But I just wanted to show you if the method is done properly, we can expect to have results within a few years after restoration, where the water comes back and the plant start thriving back again. So this is a section that was last harvested in 2015, restored in 2016. So the image that you see are from July 2017 to last July 2021. And we can clearly see, you know, the straw mulch that, you know, slowly degrades, and this is a vegetation index from the Sentinel imagery that I'm showing you right now, and we can clearly see the response of the vegetation, and this is only 4 years after intervention. So Tanya presented this result already, but we can expect to have the carbon sink and similar biodiversity levels from the reference ecosystem within 15 years after restoration. Just another example here. So this, oh, I think I clicked twice. Sorry. I'll be back. There you go. So just wanted to show you how did it look in 1999 and how does it look in 2013. And now it's even better. It's almost 9 years afterwards, but the picture is from 2013. So we can clearly see the progress in terms of coming from a bare peat surface to a carpet, a moss carpet, and a representative vegetation from a peatland. So this is my last slide. I just wanted to reflect on, you know, what does it change to have Veriflora on board regarding to restoration? Isn't it already enforced by the law to have those peatlands restored after the operation cease? Well, what does the certification change is that it does enforce the restoration of post-industrial peatlands, even if the regulation in place does not require it per se. So some areas where the sites have been operating for a very long time, for instance, the requirements or the absence of requirements are kind of grandfathered through the process. But with the certification, then you are certain that the site must be restored, must have an intervention on it to restore it, and results to show that it worked. It also brings rigorous planning of restoration activities. We are being audited for our planning of restoration activities. Does the donor site is good quality? Did we plan a budget for the restoration? So those are aspects that are looked when we have an audit. Also, it shows it enforces a timely restoration after harvesting activities cease, so that we're not letting the peat to oxidize over 15 years before restoring the site. It also makes sure we have a third-party rigorous monitoring of the floristic trajectory, biodiversity, and carbon sequestration. So those are things that make the certification even more useful and beneficial. A last point that I see is really, you know, our industry in Eastern Canada is very old. Premier Tech is 99-year-old, and from selling peat now we are being also peatland restoration experts, and we take pride in what we do. And the operators that harvest the peat in the summer are going to be the same operators that do the restoration afterwards, and they're being trained to do that restoration also. So this is really engaging to make sure, you know, it's becoming part of the culture, not only a requirement, but also part of the culture. So I'm glad that I could talk to you today, and do not hesitate if you have any question. We'll be glad to take the time to answer it, or if we don't have time, you'll be more than welcome to reach for us by email or. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. That was all very informative for me. One second. All right. I think our videos are back up as the main focus here. I really appreciated the sort of diversity of presentations here too, where, you know, in the first section, it's talking about the breadth of the process, all the different areas that we look at every year, but then getting into the GHG measurement, into the restoration, you can see the depth as well, right? So it's not just a superficial annual process, it's a rigorous process. We are a little crunched for time, so I'm going to kind of combine the roundtable and the Q&A. So I've got some questions from the audience, I've got some questions directly, so let's jump right in. So on that topic of conversation around restoration, is the goal to restore so that they can be harvested again? Do you harvest just once? What's the process there? Maybe Pierre-Olivier, Jean, since you were talking about restoration, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, the sites are not being restored so that we can harvest again. The sites where we conduct peat harvesting activities have a certain depth needed to make them viable for peat harvest operations. So the peat that was harvested did accumulate for many hundreds of years. So there's a time frame problem here. We don't restore so that we can harvest again, because we would need then to be harvesting in maybe 1,000 years, which is, so just to point out that this is not the reason why we do it. We do it because it started as a good citizen, corporate citizen practice, and now we're happy that it's becoming the new norm, the new normal, so to speak.
Excellent. Yeah. I think that's the interesting thing with this too, is just the timelines are beyond a human scale, right? It's a renewable resource, but a very slowly renewable resource. In some of the,
that's a really important point in the scale. When we talk about other natural resources, we kind of imagine that we can talk about human, like anthropogenic scale. And when we talk about peat, we are talking about thousands of years. So the scale is different.
we had a question from the audience on the costs of restoration, the costs, and you know, costs are not just financial. There's a time cost that, you know, talking about training your staff, cross-training operations teams to be able to restore it. Do you have metrics on what's it cost to restore a hectare or an acre? Do you all have thoughts on that?
I can take that one if you want.
Sure.
We do have cost associated. For sure, it comes with efficiency of the work itself. And through the research, and since the technique is very old, we do have restoration guides now available. We are at the 3rd edition right now. And those include ways of managing those costs, you know, time frame of operation, using better equipment, more adequate equipment for what we want to do, etc. There's always some variability in the cost, and Pierre-Olivier and Tanya, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but normally we're talking about something like $700 per hectares to restore, all things considered. And things can go really well and cost less, and sometimes it can go really wrong and cost more. That's how it is. But as a rule of thumb, that would be the cost associated.
Per acre or per hectare?
Per acres. So, sorry.
Great. That's I'm impressed you can pull those numbers out. That's off the cuff. I had another question. Lee had asked, does the company choose which sites are audited in a given year, or does SCS choose which sites? And we choose through sampling methodology. So we try and see every site within a 3-year certification cycle. We do try to group sites so that we have less travel time. And we're a benefit corporation. We're focused on sustainability. We do want to minimize the climate footprint, the carbon footprint of our auditing operations. So we try and be efficient. That being said, we do select which sites. It's not up to the producer to just say, these are our well-performing sites, come look at these ones. We want to see all of it. And, you know, in the auditing portion of the presentation, you know, that Pierre-Olivier talked about the interviews of workers, and our methodology follows ISO best practices there, where we look at document review, or we do document review, looking at policies in place. We do site visits to, you know, see that it's actually being implemented, but then we talk to workers to triangulate, and that's a really important resource for us in terms of doing a proper assessment. It's not just, you know, making sure that the policies are written, because you could have an office full of policies that aren't actually happening in the field. So we triangulate through that.
And if I can add to that, that's the reason why we do want to have more than just that annual checklist. We want to be embedded within our operation, because like you said, it's a matter of our guys on the field really knowing what we're talking about when we're saying Veriflora certification.
Mm-hmm. I have another question here from the audience. There are articles, editorials arguing the growers need to move away from peat and towards other materials, coir, wood fiber, composts, due to greenhouse gas. Can the panel comment on how responsibly managed peatlands compare to possible alternative materials? And I guess this gets to that broader conversation of are peatlands sustainable, right? And are the alternatives viable? And I think it's worth noting, all of these companies work beyond peat, right? It's not just what your operations are doing. This is one aspect. But do you all want to jump in on that? And I think this is a great point of conversation.
I can go ahead, Tanya.
I'm just want to highlight a few topics here. The first one will be like Sphagnum peat moss is a local growing media in North America, and will have low transportation and distribution carbon footprint. So when we talk about alternative, we need to put things in perspective and quantify what is the carbon footprint. I'm pretty sure my colleagues will add more into that, but I would like to say that when we talk about sustainable resource, we are talking about that the peat that accumulate each year in Canada, that is around 20 million tons, the harvested is not reaching that level. So when we talk about sustainability, we are talking about, are we able to maintain a sustainable, meaning an equal, at least an equal harvesting that where the resource is able to grow. And in this case, we are harvesting 1.5 million tons. That is much less than where the peat accumulate every year in Canada.
Yeah, more on the perspective between growing media components. Berger, Premier, and Sangro, they're all producing mixes, so horticultural mixes, and there's a strong interest in the industry in general for renewable in the substrates, but the peat, not only it performs very well in terms of production for professional growers, but also it is a resource that is available in large volumes and is devoid of pathogen. So it's a very hard resource to replace, so to speak, in the current state of the market. For sure, the renewable, whether it's wood fiber or other fibers, are going to be more and more present in the future. But I think peat has still its place. But we must make sure that this peat is produced responsibly. The sites are being taken care of responsibly once the operations are completed, and that the future can have a place for peat in the industry, produced responsibly, so to speak. Pio, anything else to add?
I would like to touch back to what Tanya said, and I think it needs to be explored more, where any kind of natural resource does have impacts on the environment. Tanya touched to greenhouse gases related to transportation, but I think what people need to do right now, there's no black and white solution where a media will come in and just be the ideal choice for everyone on the market. You need to consider the impacts on both the environment, the economics, and the social from all those alternatives, and then make a good choice based on that. Because, like Tanya said, there are impacts that we are not aware necessarily from those alternatives, and there's surely impacts from peat, and that's what we're trying to manage right now with the certification and the research, the scientific research that we're doing and all that. But there are also impacts from those alternatives that needs to be taken into account when you're choosing if you're going to put peat in your mix or not.
Yeah, I think that social element is so critical too, and it's much harder to measure and quantify. And you know, in low, I guess, environments that are less regulated, right? Canada in particular is highly regulated. There's a lot of protections in place just from a legal standpoint. Other parts of the world don't have that, and I think there's still a lot of research to be done in terms of comparative LCAs, but also figuring out ways to quantify the social impacts of the different mediums, right? Because agriculture, any kind of natural resource extraction has costs, and it's at a certain point, it's a issue of measuring them and comparing, and it's not easy. It's a hard thing to do. It also speaks
and that's
to,
why you need to. Oh, sorry, Kevin. I was just saying that I think at this point you need to. We'll get it. Go for it.
Okay, sorry, the lag is a bit much, I know. I think it also speaks to not all peat is the same, right? Certified peat under this program is held to a higher standard than other peat on the market and from other parts of the world. So that's another consideration. But go ahead, Pierre, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying that you need to outweigh the benefits from those impacts. So like I said, there are impacts to peat harvesting for sure. And at this point, you need to consider, you know, we're talking about low product, we're talking about being a critical component of the food security chain and all that. So you need to check and see, is it worth it? Is it actually worth it to go in there, take that peat and use it as a growing media, considering all pertaining to it, basically. So we need to do that work, and I think every consumers need to do that work to check if it's worth it or not.
I think, and completing what you are saying, PO, is that we need to focus as well on the manufacturing of alternative and how we get to those alternatives and what is the energy that we consume to produce those alternatives are part of this conversation. And I think we are open to look at options and alternatives, but at this point, peat moss is essential growing media that is gonna continue being part of the mixes.
Yes. Well, we are at time, and I'm sorry to some of the audience. There are attendees. There are a ton of good questions here, and we just sort of we had more content than could fit in an hour. Pierre-Olivier, Tanya, Pierre-Olivier, merci, gracias. Thank you so much. I appreciate your energy and effort today. For attendees, we will send you the recording, and we will try and answer some of the questions after the fact. Again, all four of us are easily reachable. If you have specific questions you want to talk to us, please do reach out. I think we are all available on that front. So thank you all. Have a great day. I'm going to end it.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Kevin.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good day, everyone.
Bye-bye.